and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Bryony Billson and this is the show where you get the chance to have your questions answered by our resident property experts. So let's see who we have on the panel today. A warm welcome to Paul Mahoney, Managing Director at Nova Financial Group.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us. John Howard, property developer and author.
Hi.
Thank you. And last but by no means least, Stephen Galpin, property consultant.
Hi.
Welcome to today's show. We've got a number of questions to get through. So I'm going to go straight to you, Paul, with our first question. If I were to use the equity in my current house as a deposit on a house that I intend to buy at auction and then turn into an HMO, would I be able to get a buy-to-let mortgage to complete the acquisition of the property?
Good question. So traditionally, no.
Okay.
Well, traditionally it would depend on the state of the property they're buying at auction.
Right.
They're planning to convert it. They would only be able to get a buy-to-let mortgage on the property at auction if it had a usable kitchen and bathrooms and those sorts of things. But another thing to consider is when buying at auction, you need to complete within 30 days. Most buy-to-let mortgages will probably take longer than that. So quite often what people do is they get bridging finance in place, which is quicker and allows them to complete on the purchase. It will generally also allow them to do the refurb or the conversion they're planning to do, and then they could exit that short-term finance with a buy-to-let mortgage. So that's quite important to keep in mind, is the time frame that's involved of completing, because they're putting down the deposit at auction, then having to complete, then having to do the works. I believe there are some new products in the market that allow for work to take place, and essentially it's a condition of the mortgage that the works do take place, and then it's finished within a certain period of time. With some of the more flexible lenders, but I suppose the idea here is make sure they've got the right the finance that's fit for purpose in place, and the best way to do that is get advice.
I think that's right. I mean, buying at auction is you've got to be on the ball.
Yeah.
You've got to be on the ball, and it's not always the right place for a first purchase property development, if you like, or investment, because you haven't got any time. You've got to get on with it. A lot of pressure. Sometimes you're best to look elsewhere for your first purchase.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's about pressure. Yeah. And I think any form of property development, ownership, or anything to do with property, stay away from pressure, because pressure will cost you money.
Mm. Look how relaxed he looks. Yeah. Fantastic.
Money.
Good advice. Does any of your advice change? They talk about wanting to turn it into an HMO. Is just the same advice?
Well, again, that's quite a specialist. And HMO these days, you've got all the fire precautions. You've got to get registered with the council. You've got to be on the ball with it. It's not straightforward, is it?
Also, it's been a bit of a buzzword for years now, yeah. HMO, and whether HMO actually works in an area anymore is questionable. Yep. For the reasons John mentioned, but also, is there the market for it? Right. Is it already flooded? There's a whole range of things to consider as to whether a HMO actually makes sense, as opposed to it doubles my yield, so let's do it.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. Brilliant. Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, because I feel like we answered that clearly for that person. I'm going to go to you, John. Is it possible to get bridging finance on a property that I want to buy, renovate and then rent out? My initial inquiries reveal that bridging loans need an exit route, which usually involves the sale of the property. What do you think?
Well, you've got to be careful with bridging loans, because they're expensive, because it's basically short-term lending.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the thing to remember. And you're probably going to be paying 10% per annum interest on the money. So if you need to purchase a property that needs doing up, then certainly look to the bridging people to borrow off. But quite right, most of them don't want to lend for more than a year, and I personally think a year is maximum. So you want to get in, get it organised, get the build work done, and then refinance. If you want to keep it, refinance it on a buy-to-let mortgage or something like that. If you're just doing up to sell, then you need to be organised, get it refurbished quickly, and get it on the market quickly, because that money is costing a lot every month.
Yeah, just as John said, be conscious of the timing, because if there are delays, that could completely kill it.
Yeah, kills the deal.
Also, I think John's used to getting great rates because he's got experience, but some bridging loans can be a lot more expensive than that. They can be up to 2.5% a month. So if it's your first time, you're probably going to be.
I should have said from 10%. shouldn't I?
It's probably going to be at the upper end because they'll consider you more of a risk. So it is expensive money, and it's kind of usually only used if that's the only solution for that period of time.
You know, if you're paying 2% a month, you've got to have a better deal than I can find, probably. And I like to think we know what we're doing.
I think when you're appraising these deals, you know, often when somebody's starting out, time is the one element they forget to think about.
And it's so important.
So expensive.
Time is money.
Do you have any advice then in your experience of managing time with property
Oh
developing?
no, but it's just a very important assessment that you must make. Whether if planning permission is involved, maybe it's sensible to look at the distance between or the timing between planning meetings in that authority, for instance, because if you fail at one and they're only sitting in 6-month cycles, then you've got 6 months to wait before your next opportunity. And who's going to pay for that?
Yeah.
You've got a property on your books you've got to pay for, either interest
Yeah,
or...
absolutely. I'll get as much organised before you actually commit to that property as possible. So get all the building prices back in, get the building almost ready to start. So as soon as you've completed the purchase, they're in the next week, bang, doing it. Not, oh, I'll then I'll get organised and 3 months later we'll start work. No, it's not good enough. The week after you've bought that, you want the builders in and getting it going, and you want to make sure you get a fixed time and price off that builder, so when he's going to be out, or her.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, thank you. Yeah, some really clear and direct advice there. Thank you very much. Right, Stephen, when house prices start to stop their growth in an area such as Nottinghamshire, does that indicate that the area will take a long time to see growth again? And if so, are landlords best to try to exit in case things get worse, such as with the possibility of no Brexit? What do you think?
Well, I don't think there's a real answer to that question.
No,
I think because it's too broad in a way. Let's just look at what happens. You will find, here we go, you see I get criticised now, but
It's coming.
Here in London we have a fairly instant effect on property when things happen, whether it's Brexit, whether it's interest rates or anything else. And what happens then is you get an instant, almost overnight effect in London. It then ripples out across the country. It will accelerate faster in places like Manchester or Birmingham or Nottingham, wherever. The key is to understand what's going to happen next, and if we all knew, we'd all be very wealthy, I think, wouldn't we? But what tends to happen is you will start to get the sort of seeds of activity in London again, and gradually again those seeds will ripple out across the country. It doesn't actually work in reverse, so we don't go that way and then zoom back in this way. So it can be quite a long process where you're out of the centre of any major town. The simplest way of judging what's happening, you'll start to see some of the for sale boards having sold on them. I mean, I can remember it when we had the crash in the 80s. It was months, if not a couple of years, before we saw any sold signs.
Right.
You know, but that's the kind of information you've got to look to. Once again, we talk so often on this programme about having your contacts in the property market, having your team around you. Develop your relationships with your local agent. They'll always keep you informed, and if you have a good relationship, you'll get a little bit of advance warning of what's happening. Yeah. So I'm afraid I can't tell you what's going to happen in Nottingham or Manchester or anybody or anywhere else, or even in London, but just look for the signs. And once again, comes back in a way to the previous question. Don't put yourself under pressure. If you're going to get in a situation where the property is going to have to go because you need the money and you're pressured, you'll lose money. The successful property developer will be able to make these judgments, spread his investment out, go for his development over a period of time, and build in a factor that allows him to have those delays or hiccups in the market.
There's one trick I can give people, and that is this. When car sales start to go up, normally follows that the property market does the same. Car sales first, because it's more instant. So when people are feeling better about themselves, start buying new cars and a bit more confident about the market and about the economy, property follows.
Interesting.
Just something to add to that.
Thank you.
In my opinion, property is about time in the market, not time-ing the market. So it seems like this person is seeing the market flatten a bit and thinking, should I sell and get out at the top and maybe I could buy back in a couple of years? Nobody can do that. You know, no one can say this is the top, this is the bottom. But property is a mid to long term investment. You know, if you're confident that was a good investment in the first place, hold on to it. You know, if it doesn't fit in with your portfolio, your strategy anymore, then sell it for that reason, not because you've seen a bit of a plateau in the market.
Thank you. Okay.
I think I'm just going to add something to John's car.
Oh yes.
Analogy
Is it another
there.
top tip? Because we like those.
Well, I don't know. Look, in general, I'd agree with you.
Oh, thank you.
If there's a feel-good
It's a
factor,
first.
people buy. But let's go back to 2008 when we had the crash.
Yes.
The car market crashed as well, exactly at that point. However,
First.
2008 till 2016, before we started to get involved in Brexit, the car market is absolutely rocketed.
Yep.
And what the government should learn from that, and the banks too, is that the car market has rocketed because it's made readily available finance for those cars. You and I can go out and buy something quite flashy and special for very little down and a monthly payment. And yet the housing market, the funding opportunities have got less and less and less and more stringent.
Well, I would disagree with that.
Well, hold on. We've had all this fuss, haven't we, that young people can't buy their new home because the deposits are too big.
But what have the government done? They've put 10 billion aside for help to buy. 10 billion pounds. That's an enormous amount of money.
It is an enormous amount of money, but I'd look at the take-up rate.
The take-up rate is quite good.
So
It's quite good.
Unfortunately, we do have to take a short break, but maybe we'll be back to debate that a little bit more. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with a few more of your questions in just a few moments. Welcome back to Property Question Time for the second half of today's show. And we're going to go straight in with another question to you, Paul. Having bought a one-bed in London 3 years ago with a £25,000 deposit, I've now got £100,000 equity, maybe a tad more. I don't like the block and I'm moving out. My fiance has her own place and we married in the spring, so we're moving in together. I can rent it, but other income and tax clampdowns means I don't make any net profit. I could sell, but I don't know where to invest the 100,000 plus equity. Any ideas?
Okay, well, first off, congratulations.
Yes.
300% return in 3 years is pretty good going.
I thought you meant the finance. I thought you meant
I thought you meant for the wedding.
Yeah, for the wedding.
Congratulations for the wedding.
And the wedding, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't
mind.
like the block. It seems difficult to refinance. What was the reason for being difficult to refinance?
Tax clampdowns.
Okay.
They don't make any net profit.
Okay, fine. It might be the serviceability. The fact it's in London, yields are low in London, prices are high.
Yeah.
With some changes last year that the Prudential Regulatory Authority brought in place, buy-to-let mortgages need to cover a benchmark rate of 5.5%, which means if your rental income is less than about 4% yield, you're in trouble, so far as the amount you can borrow. So that might be the reason. That 100,000, in my opinion, could definitely be better utilised outside of London for a buy-to-let. You know, London is, again, in my opinion, increasingly becoming more difficult to justify on a buy-to-let basis. One of the reasons is serviceability, as I mentioned. The fact that you can borrow less. So, for example, if you've got a £500,000 average property price in London, generally the most you can borrow to buy that property is about £300,000. So you're applying £200,000, which is a lot of money to one single property, and that will probably only just be breaking even. So therefore, you're investing solely for growth in a market that's already done really well from a growth perspective, which in my mind doesn't make a lot of sense. However, you could take that £100,000 and you split it into two and buy two £200,000 properties in the likes of Birmingham, Manchester or Liverpool, centrally located, desirable properties in desirable locations, where your yields are double that of London. So overall, from a net yield perspective, you'd be doing quite well. And again, in my opinion, you'll probably do better over the next few years from a growth perspective as well.
Fantastic. You were nodding along
I am
there.
nodding. Paul makes a lot of sense, as always. I would agree with him on the yields and everything else. Not so sure. I might agree with Stephen on the growth, London growth. But you have to make a choice. Do you want growth, capital growth, or do you want income? So the north normally is more income, and the capital growth is down south as a base, a very broad basis.
So John, question from one of our viewers. We currently live in a house which occupies a plot of around 1.5 acres in a small village. Recently, there's been a lot of redevelopment in the neighbouring village, developers of around 10 houses. If we wanted to, what would be the best way to proceed with looking to develop this in a similar way?
Okay, well, first of all, there's an awful lot of development like this going on at the moment across the UK, and it's become a lot easier than it was.
Okay.
The first thing to do is get hold of a planning consultant. Ask them to pop out for a cup of tea. Hopefully the first initial meeting will be free, hopefully. Biscuits would help, I'm sure. Let them have a look, or her, look at the land and see what they think. Try and produce a site plan. You can get one off the land registry or whatever, or ordnance survey plan. So when they come, they've got something to look at, plan-wise. And then it may well be that they consider putting in a pre-application to the council, in which case they'll do that for you. And there's sometimes a charge for that, sometimes there isn't. The council should come back within 28 days with their opinion of whether it can be built on or not.
Okay.
So that's the basis to go with. Now, sometimes people think, okay, well, I've got a house here, I can cut my garden off and just build on the land at the side, which is great if you want to stay there, but don't forget there could be a lot of building work going on if you do that. There's tax implications, which I'm sure Paul will jump in on in a moment. But also you've got to remember that the house you're keeping will go down in value substantially because of what's going on next door to you by then.
Okay, thank you. Was there anything, Paul, that you wanted to add with that?
Not particularly. I think you covered it
It's
quite
just,
well.
I just think in terms of tax, you've got the situation where you've got your own house,
Yeah.
but if you sell the land off separately, you could get taxed on the land. Would that be right?
Yeah.
And you won't get taxed on the home, but of course, if you do it, it depends which way you do it. You need to take some tax advice from the accountant as well.
And also, presumably, it's actually quite hard to get planning permission, you know, in rural areas, in a village.
Well, it's a lot easier than
put
it
something
was.
on the end
It's a
of your
lot easier
garden.
than it was.
Okay.
So have a go, have a look, you know,
Yeah.
but take some professional advice.
I think the other thing is there, just to remember though, if you do part with part of your land, you've probably bought there because you enjoyed the privacy, you enjoyed the land, everything else, and you're going to have somebody living on your bit of land that you previously owned who you've got no control over. So you've lost some of your privacy, you've lost some of the advantages. On the other hand, you have got some money, but it is a balance.
It is a balance, yeah. And actually sometimes, not always, but sometimes, unless you can get quite a few properties on the land next door, you've lost so much by selling it that you, in terms of your house you're keeping is worth so much less that actually there's not much in it. So just because can get planning, sometimes not always the best thing to do.
And something we've discussed in previous episodes is actually about that being quite clear. Is this your home?
Yes.
Is this where you want to live for a long time? Do you love it and value it for what it is and for you and your family? Or is this a business decision? Is this about investing?
But I mean, it can be great for a family because they can then perhaps help the children get on the housing ladder. And so there's lots of, and it's a personal decision to them. But before, the first thing you've got to do is find out whether you can do it or not. Because if you can't do it, it's a waste of time anyway talking about it.
Yeah.
So find out first, then make that decision.
So the next question is for you, Stephen. I exchanged contracts on an apartment I'm buying as an investment to rent out in January and paid in full. Then I visited the property. It's a brand new renovated building, so I saw it just before they finished it. Since then, my lawyer's been saying there's problems with the seller's finance and they can't complete. I have found out that there are tenants living in the apartment. What can I do?
Well, a long
Panic?
chat. A long chat with the lawyer is going to be needed here. A little bit confused there. I don't know what they mean by I paid in full. I'm going to presume that they paid the deposit in full,
Yes.
which would have been a 10%. Now, after you've paid your 10% deposit, usually you'll have 28 days after before completion. Obviously, the other side have come back to the lawyer and said, well, look, we've got difficulty with tenants. But again, I'm a little bit confused because they say they looked at the building at the point of exchange, presumably there were no tenants in it then if it was being refurbished. So where have these tenants come from? I'm not quite sure of that. I don't know whether my colleagues picked anything up there. But
there's a few options.
A few options. I imagine there's short of money the developer, so it's
well,
shut to tenants.
see, that's what I was coming to next. Again, the developer being short of money or having problem with his finances would indicate that he's probably not finished it properly. He's not got vacant possession of the whole building as he should have. What are your remedies? Well, the simple contractual answer is that you give notice to complete, which gives them a number of days in which to complete, after which you're entitled to damages. Now, whether that's the right course of action for this operation, I don't know. I would start to talk to the lawyer about coming out of this transaction, I think. I don't like the sound of it. If you've got a freeholder who is behaving like this at the point of sale, heaven knows what he's going to behave like.
Get worse.
Yeah, you know, later on, you know, we're talking about property management. Well, you know, property management is pretty passive, but if you've got a bad freeholder, it's bad news. So I would be back to the lawyer, I would look at the options, probably a notice to complete will flush the issue out.
Yes.
I think that's the key. You've got to take the sort of high ground here, haven't you?
I think you've got to be tough, and I think you need to, like you said, serve the notice, gives them so many days in which to complete. On the basis of that, you could also say to them, well, look, we'd really rather have our money back, to be honest with you, and that's probably the best way out of it. Get the 10% deposit back. Whether you can get your solicitor's fees back or not, difficult.
Depending on how long has lapsed between when they exchanged as well, that there should be a long stop date in place.
Yeah.
So
on giving notice to complete, I think you're entitled to put in your legal costs.
You are,
I think,
but whether you'll get it or not, so no.
Yeah,
I mean,
I suppose so, yeah.
If the developer's in trouble, luckily the 10% should be held by the other side solicitors. So as long as they've done that and held the money, the deposit is there and safe. So you should get that back. As for costs, very difficult without going to court. And
it doesn't particularly help this person, but it does definitely highlight the importance of thorough due diligence on a developer when you're buying off plan. Yes. That is partially the solicitor's responsibility. However, solicitors, unfortunately, aren't inherently commercially minded. So they will do some checks and things, but it's probably worth working with someone, an advisor or whatever it may be, that understands this type of buying and can give you guidance on what to look for and what to avoid. You know, Stephen mentioned about the deposit being 10%. Well, in actual fact, outside of London, the deposits are more like 20 to 30%. And in some cases, they can be up to 80% over the build. Now, the latter is something to completely avoid because that means you're essentially funding the whole build. But, you know...
It won't be that on a refurbishment, though, Paul?
Generally not, no. No, not usually. But
traditionally it's 10%.
Yeah. Okay. But understanding, you know, what the deposit is, does it make sense? Is it protected? How is it protected? How is it released to the developer? Or how is it held in escrow? There's a number of different things to understand that protects you as the buyer.
And I think having those protections there are particularly important, especially when we've talked before about removing the emotional element, keeping that business mindset. Yes, maybe you need some of that emotion to help with the right judgment call on when to step out of a project, but if you're protected from the start...
I think Paul's right about another point as well. Solicitors are not always commercially minded. You'll have, when you buy a property like this, usually you'll have a report on title, which will be very technical. It'll tell you whether it's in a floodplain, it'll tell you whether planning permission has been properly sought, whether building regulations have been applied for and granted, etc., etc. But it won't actually tell you that it's a good deal or that the developer's okay. That's really down to you, and this is, again, the business aspect of property.
Well, I feel like we could talk about this topic all day long, but unfortunately we have run out of time today. Thank you so much to all three of you for sharing so much information and advice to our viewers at home. Thank you to you for watching, and we'll see you soon.
If you have any questions that you would like to send to any of our experts at Property Question Time, you can submit them via our website, on social media, or email us at info@propertytelevision.co.uk or email us on info@propertytelevision.co.uk.